This is a wonderful passage that we've just heard from Betsy. And I want to open, first of all, by saying I had the privilege of going to Charleston, South Carolina for my niece's wedding. And it was a great experience, and the clouds were overcast, and we were thinking it was going to rain, and the wedding planner, who had 4 assistants, said to me, you can't use the tent, Pastor Ed. You got to be out in the field here. And I said, get the bride here at 6. And as the bride was coming down, just a few drops were falling. And there might be some thunder in the background. The clouds got a few more drops. And by the time, halfway through, we had umbrellas over the bridesmaids and the bride. And by the time we were leaving, I wasn't long-winded that day. I was getting pretty wet. But it was really a lot of fun. But one of the things I was really enjoyed at Charleston, it was founded in 1670 at first, and the wedding was placed on the founding site, which was high ground, shallow water, where there was no way for pirates to come in. And then 10 years later, they went to the deep port, where they could be danger, but they thought they could defend themselves. And it's such a beautiful city, and they have wonderful churches and graveyards. There's a Scottish Presbyterian church there. There's another Presbyterian church, and I was walking through the graveyard, and you could see the year of the birth, the dash, year of the death, and perhaps something underneath. Perhaps there was a few lines. And it's just a really moving experience to see these people who had lived many years ago but lived in faith. Now, the Dr. Underwood at the college brings out inspirational speakers every year. And one year they had John Foppe, who had no arms. And, kind of saying like, if John can get his college degree with no arms, you shouldn't let any of your obstacles stop you either. And they had Linda Ellis come, and she has a poem called The Dash. And it's really a great poem. And I want to read it to you because we're talking about the dash on the tombstone. And she goes like this in her poem. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on her tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted the first came the date of her birth and spoke the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between the years. For that dash represents all the time that she spent alive on earth. And now only those who loved her know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live in love and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change, for you never know how much time is left, that can still be rearranged? If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real, and always try to understand the way other people feel, and be less quick to anger, show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect, and more often with a smile, remember that this little dash might only last a little while. So when your eulogy is being read, with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? Oh, this is so great. And I have an illustration about the dash. And it's a sports illustration in honor of some of our baseball fans. And for those who don't follow baseball or other sports, I think you'll like it anyway. And this was in the obituary of the New York Times. Fred Snodgrass, 86, dead. Okay. This is back in 1974. On April 5th, 1974, the obituary of the Times goes, Frederick Carlisle Snodgrass died. And they printed the news with the headline, Fred Snodgrass, 86, dead, ball player, muffed a fly in 1912. This is right before the First World War. You know, you'll see these players make an error or drop the ball. I've seen this. Well, so the sports writer would not let the world forget that Fred Snodgrass made a mistake in a ball game many, many years ago before his death, 62 years before his death. The writer spelled it out in detail. In the 10th inning of the tie-breaking 8th game of the World Series, 8 games, it was different back then. The batter hit a routine pop fly. An easy catch. But Fred Snodgrass dropped the ball, making an error which set up the winning run. His error led to a 2-run Boston rally and cost the New York Giants the championship. The error was called the $30,000 muff because that's how much money the Giants would have made if they won the World Series, which that game determined it. Now, throughout the history of baseball, there would be many more players that would make an error that would cost their team the pennant. Remember, there was a Boston first baseman, the ball went under his glove, and Boston fans could never forget that. Unfortunately, this writer wrote as though Fred Snodgrass's life ended the day he made the mistake. But it didn't. Now, another obituary reminds us that Fred, after baseball, went to California, settled down in a small town called Oxnard, became the mayor of the city, was a very successful banker and rancher, raised a family there. Fred served all the people of Oxnard with great compassion, with vision and trust. Everyone in Oxnard loved and respected him. So there's 2 ways to look at life. You know, that one time when you drop the fly ball, or what happens all through the years as you serve. Now, in our Bible reading, it's just a powerful message. We have a wonderful Jewish Christian. Her name is Tabitha, which means a graceful gazelle. Oh, she's just so wonderful. And I think she was listening to Peter when she got converted, because James stayed, the brother of Jesus, led the church in Jerusalem. Peter goes by the coast, and he works there along the coast of the Sea of Galilee. And Tabitha listened to the gospel, and she believed the gospel. Now, in my readings this past week, I came across some writings of non-Christians in the ancient days, like what they said, like a writer or a Caesar. What did they say about Christians? And one of them said that Jesus convinced his people that they were brothers, like brothers and sisters. In other words, he made them believe that the other people were their brothers in the church family, wherever they were. That other Christian was really their sister or their brother. Now that's very powerful. And Mother Teresa had a big teaching about this. And years ago, there was a pastor in Washington, D.C. at the Presbyterian Cathedral there, a really big church, and Mother Teresa came and spoke there. And the pastor's name was Dr. Louis Evans, Jr., no relation to me, and his wife said to Mother Teresa, what could I do to help? Mother Teresa, she's only like 4'9" or so, looks up at her and says, love your family. And Mrs. Evans wrote a little book. And wasn't that wonderful how Mother Teresa asked me to love my family? And of course she was loving her family. But later on, Mother Teresa was asked, what is the biggest problem of the world today? Well, what would you say? The Ebola virus? Terrorism? War? Hunger? What would you say? They asked Mother Teresa, what is it? She said this: the concept of family is too small. What is she saying? The family needs to be bigger. How we see others needs to be bigger like Jesus said, that other person's your sister, that other person is your brother. And if we would recognize that, we would treat more people with respect. And so her secret was she actually went a step further, because she also believed Jesus in Matthew 25, when Jesus said, when you help the least of people, you're helping me, Jesus. And so she taught the other nuns, when you pick up that person in Calcutta in the gutter, and the person is dirty, and the wounds are there festering, and it smells, and you don't want to do it, remember, it's Jesus in his distressing disguise. I mean, it is distressing to see such an awfulness there, but it's Jesus. Therefore, they had the motivation to really, really help. And it's sort of like Jesus gives us a different eyesight. And one of the marks of a Christian is this. In Matthew 25, is not the Christian would be, oh, I see suffering, I'm not doing anything. I see somebody hungry, I'm not doing anything. And it's really faith that saves us, but then we begin a spiritual growth called sanctification. You grow spiritually, and it's like you see something and you respond. Now, there was a famous photograph many years ago in Hong Kong, and it was after World War II, and there was a refugee child, and the photographer saw that, and this little child was gazing through a window in which two people were having a feast in a restaurant. A lot of food, and the little child just looking at it longingly. The photographer snaps the picture. He gets a prize, a worldwide prize for that photo. That little, very hungry Hong Kong child trying to get some food, and somebody asked him, well, that photo really paid off for you. You made, tens and tens of thousands of dollars and all this fame, and your name is made. Did you feed the kid? No. In other words, he could see something, but he wouldn't respond. He didn't respond, and the kid went hungry. Now, that's the trick. That's the key. Could we see something and then respond? Now, Tabitha, she comes to this house church, and she really understands that these people are my sisters, especially the widows. And back then you were very poor. If you were a widow, you don't have Social Security. And she is really good at something that some of you are good at. She's good at sewing. And she looks at the person. That poor widow doesn't have warm clothes when that cold air comes off the Mediterranean Sea on the seashore there. It's a seaside town. I'll make her a dress. I'll make her an outfit. I'll make her a covering to keep her warm. And she sews it up. And she sees others in that church family, and she probably has to say, I need some money for buying some clothes, or could you donate some cloth? I want to sew another dress. I want to sew another coat. And all of a sudden in that church, she is caring for the people. She sees with compassion, which is a sign of a Christian, and then she responds in a wise way, helping the widows. Now we come to the dash. She dies. And the people are very distraught because this was such a loving person. And when there's a loving person in the church family that really cares about people, it leaves like, something's really missing. And they said, we got to get Peter for this funeral. He's over in Joppa, not too far away. So he runs over to like the equivalent to Sandoval. They run over, two of them to get him, and they bring him back. And they begin to show Peter, look at what she did. Now this happens at funerals. When I've done so many funerals here, it's just when you look at our special foam thing we make back there, that has in the back all the people who died in 1980, 81, 82, 83. It's a lot more than our membership today. And these are wonderful people. And when I had the honor of being there, we hear wonderful things from the people. Oh my goodness, they'll say, this person did so-and-so for me. And that's really a wonderful thing for the family to hear. If you could share those things, that's really great. And they were doing the same thing back then. Peter, this is what she did for us. It is so, so very wonderful. Well, the point of this message is tell them before they go. I love it when people do that. After my mom died, I went back years later to a store to get some Levi's, and the salesman there said, "Are you Grace's son?" I said, "Yes." "Oh, she was a wonderful lady. I really liked her." I really like that, hearing about how that person, made a difference. Oh, I really appreciated it. And that's one of the best things you could do. But the point is this. Could we tell them now? Could we tell them before they go? Now, I have a lot of gratitude for people, and I brought some candles with me today. And in these candles, I'll bring them over here, these represent like the light that other people bring for us. People light up our lives. They make a difference. I had one person who was an education consultant in Ohio, in my very first church. When you come out of seminary, you know the Bible, you know theology, you know something about counseling, but you really don't know people. That's the real surprise. And people are people. And it's like, oh, we have to really, really learn how to be a pastor. And so new pastors need a lot of patience. But then Raleigh would teach us. And one time Raleigh told me this story, which really taught me something in a powerful way. He said, this is back before cell phones. His son says to him, and he lives in Zanesville, Ohio at the time, "Dad, I want the car for the prom, high school prom." "Okay. Get back by midnight." "Okay, Pop. Okay, Dad." Midnight. No car. 1 o'clock. No car. 2 o'clock. No car. Guess what he's beginning to think? Is he off in a ditch? Did he run into a canal? 3 o'clock. 4 o'clock. 5 o'clock. 6 o'clock in the morning. He calls the police. "Have you seen such and such car on the road?" "No, we haven't seen an accident like that." 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 noon, the car comes in, 12 hours late. His son, everything's in one piece. Now he's feeling two emotions. Now Raleigh is teaching me this. Raleigh is feeling two emotions. Can you guess what they are? Anger. I lost all my sleep last night. I was worried, The second feeling he had was, oh, I'm so relieved. And what he did was this, and this is where he's teaching me. He went to the stronger feeling, which was relief. He goes out, he's crying, he has his arms open. His son comes out of his car with his arms open. They're both crying. And then the son's able to tell the story. Now, if he went to anger, there would have been no story. It would have been different. The story was, his girlfriend broke up with him. He got in the car and started driving down Interstate 70. Boys sometimes just don't think. And they had no cell phones back then. And he's not thinking. And finally, he comes to his senses and turns around, doesn't get back till noon. And it taught me, what's the stronger feeling? What is it? He's also a peacemaker. The second thing he taught me was about peacemaking. And he had a minister in the Coshocton, Ohio area, and things did not go well in that church. And we've seen that in this town. Things don't go well sometimes. And the pastor was coming up for his last sermon. He is sort of being pushed out, and he's angry, and he is going to tell that congregation off. In his sermon, he is going to be like John the Baptist with fire and brimstone and tell them what awful people they are. And Raleigh comes by Saturday night, afternoon, late afternoon, a loaf of fresh baked bread and a bottle of wine. Pours the wine, lets that pastor pour out all the upset, all the anger. And what's Raleigh doing? Letting it out. Not telling them to stop it, just let it out, let it out, let it out. And finally, in the end, the guy calms down. They make some peace. And the guy is able to make a graceful exit. This is what you want. You don't need to leave a position or leave a situation like that. And so the thing is this. Who taught us? Who was that Girl Scout leader or Eastern Star? Who was that youth leader? I think of other people. I think of a person, Frances Jo Wally, in our church family years ago, and she was the secretary to Judge Wam. And he was a powerful judge. He was appointed by the president over other people that the politicians wanted because he knew he could trust Fred to clean things up in a corrupt particular place where he was going to be judged. It was corrupt. People were making money deals there, and he cleaned it up. But his secretary noticed something in the court cases. Women would come in with bruises. They would come in with hurts. And she's thinking, something needs to be done. And she petitions Presbytery and gets a grant for money for a group called Women in Need. It was called WIN. And some of you have been on the board. Robin Mayfield in our church at one point was head of it, and she went off to up to Minnesota to become a judge. And it's like it grew. Now it's called PAVE, People Against Violent Environments. Before it was like a big closet where they met, but it was responding to a need. She made a big difference. She had some expertise, what to do and where to go, and she saw a need and responded. And we had people like Bernice Merkelbach. In every church I served, there have been people with fingers that are all gnarled up with rheumatoid arthritis. It's in pain. And you would go visit her, and rather than complain, she would ask you how you're doing. This is astonishing to me. She was really teaching me again. How are you? And she was famous for that. She would lift people's spirits up. It was hard on her, but she lifted people's spirits up. And her husband, after she died, he noticed one gal in our church that he cared about her. She was a mom that was on welfare when they had welfare in the old days, and she had a child getting in trouble. And I talked to her one day, and I just said, you have a skill. You ought to become a nurse. You really have the kind of compassion, caring skill. And so she went to Kaskaskia College. They had a scholarship. But Walter bought her uniform, you had to have the right shoes. If you're a nurse walking the floor, he did that, bought her books. And he said, Ed, don't tell anybody, but now he's gone, so I could tell you. But you see, there's people in our church family that cared about you and loved you in the past. And here's the point. Who do we tell them before they go? And the other thing we could do, if they've already gone on to be with God, we could tell their family. I'd like to tell you a story about your grandpa, your aunt, your uncle, your child, whatever it was. That person was a blessing. Well, Peter disrupts the funeral. He goes up and prays and raises her up. And this sounds terrible, but back in those days, there were people who were buried alive. You would get into a coma, and they actually found in England the lead caskets where you see scratch marks. And it really scared people about being buried alive. And when I did the Charleston trip, they had a person, we took the horse and buggy type ride around and hearing all the stories, and she pointed out the cemeteries and stuff, and she said this: in the old days, people were afraid in Charleston of being buried alive. So now, I don't know if she was telling me a story or the truth, but I kind of like the story, that they would have a bell above the grave with a string so the person could ring it if they came to, because they didn't have embalming and things like that. And so she said it was saved by the bell. Then she made a joke of it, because she said if they came too late for you, you would be a dead ringer. That was kind of silly. But Peter comes along and raises her up. He raises her up, and she's able to be in service, and she could begin to see. And the people in that church family could say, we almost lost her, but now I could really see Jesus in her, and it's time to tell her. So let's tell people before they go. I have one illustration I shared the other week, and that's where I missed the ball, and that's why it's so important to me. We had a pastor here for 25 years called Reverend Roy Buffett, and he retired around 1960, and I heard so much about him, I thought, well, let's get a scrapbook together. Let's write letters. And people gave some money. We got $1,000 and a scrapbook full of pictures and letters, and we bring it. And Mrs. Buffett says, oh, he died. I'm going, oh no. Tell them before they go. I'm thinking, he died. But, he had what we now call Alzheimer's at the end, so he wouldn't have known what it was at the end. So that would have been different. And then she wrote us later and said, it was such a blessing to see the pictures, to see the letters. The money was nice, but the best thing was the letters and the pictures and all the appreciation. I am so grateful. So don't make my mistake. Tell them before they go. Amen.